Welcome and buenas tardes, buenas noches, everyone, to session 2, Digital Water Tech for Equity, Security, and Resiliency, which is part of the Focus on America's session within Stockholm World Water Week programming. I'm excited to co-convene the session with FEMSA Foundation, the Inter-American Development Bank, and water.org. Please note, and this is important, that we have simultaneous interpretation available in English and Spanish on the Interactio app. Instructions on how to connect are available on the Pathable chat. A few thoughts before we dive into this. I think everyone knows that pretty much digital technologies have been transforming the water sector in both the public and private sectors, and adopting technologies such as remote sensing, data analytics, and artificial intelligence. The digital transformation was well underway prior to the pandemic and has only accelerated for obvious reasons over the past year and a half. Digital technologies, which is one of my favorite topics and what I tend to focus on, are really enabling greater access to safe drinking water through technologies such as hydro panels, which you'll hear about shortly, and mobile payment access to water dispensing systems. Also, keep in mind that while we tend to focus on digital transformation of the utility sector, water and wastewater utilities, we're really seeing digital technologies being adopted at scale by multinationals to address water security and watershed health as part of their water stewardship strategies. You'll also hear that later today. Finally, the impact of investing in innovative technologies to increase water security can now be measured using a simple and cost-effective framework, which is also on the session or in the session today. I can't emphasize this enough. This is a well-curated panel discussion. The folks that have been invited and graciously accepted are real innovators and don't accept the status quo and are leading the way to increase water security, equity, and resiliency. This session is divided into 2 segments. Topic 1 is the promise of digital water tech, available technology, and topic 2 is disrupting water, digital technology adoption and implementation, basically what it looks like in the field. A few quick items before we get going. We'll be doing a Q&A at the end of this, so please feel free to write in your questions in the chat as we are presenting, and we'll do our best to get through many of these questions as time permits. It's important that you interact and engage. Secondly, after the presentation, we'll be sending out a link to a survey. These webcasts are designed to be as useful and relevant as possible, so feedback is important. It just take a minute or so. Thank you to everyone who is participating in this session. And also thank you to my friend and colleague, Keith Hayes, for moderating the session. So with that, Keith, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks very much, Will. And thanks again to be here. It's a pleasure to be with our esteemed group of speakers who are going to be offering some key insights into really how the Americas region can and will be transformed through digital innovations. So with that, let me briefly introduce everyone and then we'll get into our first topic. So first we've got Ivan Lalovic from GAIB. Ivan is the founder and CEO of GAIB. It's a startup focused on changing how water quality issues are tracked and understood and solved. Second, we've got Shimon Constante from Candu. Shimon is a multidisciplinary specialist in infrastructure, innovation, and environmental projects at Candu, which is a wastewater analytics platform provider. Shimon acts as a strategy and innovation consultant. Thirdly, we've got Andre Fori at AB InBev. Andre is Global Director of Water Sustainability at Anheuser-Busch InBev, which is the world's largest brewer. And then lastly, but not least, obviously it's a great pleasure to have Gigi Carmus-Edwards with us from Carmus-Edwards Consulting. Gigi is a leading voice in the industry for developing digital twins. She works with global leaders of water utilities and technology companies, helping them to accelerate digital transformation. So we're surrounded by really innovative thought leaders on this panel. Just to frame this, if we can move to the next slide here, talking about the status of the Americas. So, as Will mentioned, we're talking about what is possible in this first segment in terms of technologies, what technologies are out there and what problems they can solve. But the water sector, and especially the publicly managed municipal water sector, is not necessarily known for quick adoption of new solutions. And partly related to that is just the basic infrastructure challenges. As this slide indicates, much of the Americas is still targeting meeting basic infrastructure objectives related to their SDGs for water and sanitation. We've got about 53% of the region's population has access to improved, safely managed drinking water, according to UNICEF, and only 19% has a sewer connection. But that's changing. There are leapfrog opportunities here if these technologies that we're going to hear more about are implemented successfully. And so we'd like to get our speakers' perspectives on the why and how of those changes. So what I'm going to do here is pose a few questions to each speaker. I may have a few follow-ups to those answers, and we'll seek to weave this together at the end for some takeaways. So with that, I'd first like to go to Ivan, and with the first question. The first question we had here is really about, of the portfolio of technologies that are out there, and there's a lot, and we can start out with the basics, which are getting some instrumentation on our network. We can talk about more sophisticated software systems. Of all that's being offered right now, what technologies do you think are in most dire need of adoption in the Americas to advance countries towards their SDGs, and why? So let me let you have a go at that first, Ivan.
Thanks, Keith, and thanks, Will. Really happy to be here. My perspective, having spent 2 decades in enabling digital technologies for companies that produce microprocessors and memory technologies for semiconductors, is really that measurements and measurement technologies are an enabler for really applying solutions to various water and sanitation issues. And our perspective is that in particular, low cost and scalable monitoring solutions such as remote sensing, so using satellite imagery, for example, to derive insights, is really something that's straightforward to implement across geographies. And starting with that, it enables understanding what are the hotspots, what are the specific challenges, how do you deploy technologies that work, and then evaluate as you invest more and more in infrastructure, those types of solutions that are working in very general terms. Now, giving you a succinct answer in a minute is difficult on this topic because of its complexity, but my basic assertion is that monitoring technologies, whether it's distributed IoT or remote sensing, is simple enough to deploy and will enable the kind of feedback loops that are needed to then iterate on particular solution paths for a specific problem.
Great. No, that's very interesting, I think. And it's also, how does that idea of monitoring get incorporated into some of that basic infrastructure build out as well, right? If we're just talking about laying pipe, can those decisions about where to lay the pipe already be thinking about how to monitor their maintenance and how that's going to fit into longer term operational decision making? So, and I think you're probably referring to, Ivan, here, not just water pipe, but it would be wastewater pipe as well, just monitoring in general and measuring flow, yeah, for instance?
Yeah, certainly for infrastructure in terms of distribution systems, but also for source water protection, for example, understanding, surface water. Though the surface water is typically used for irrigation, agriculture, drinking water, and is also a receptacle for downstream wastewater as well. So understanding its overall holistic health, being able to monitor it. So not just from operational standpoint, so how do you operate and manage, but also from a planning perspective, as you mentioned. So where do you implement particular solutions? Where do you implement where policy or management actions playing out favorably? Those are all predicated upon measurement that's insightful and distributed. The other part that I think is enabled by measurement is investments, in the sense that once you have proof points of certain solutions working, it's much easier to stimulate and enable investments that are then achieve targeted outcomes. So you have the ability to verify whether investments are indeed yielding the kind of improvements in water and sanitation that are targeted.
Right. And so you mentioned there, downstream wastewater, which I know Shimon, I believe Candu is really focused on making use of some of that data that is captured through monitoring wastewater assets. Yeah, could you comment on this first question here about what do you think are the technologies that are most dire need of adoption?
Sure. First of all, Keith, great seeing you. And I'm very happy to be here. I think this is one of the subjects that are definitely becoming the most important in the water sector at the moment. And mainly to turn the water industry into an efficient one, and hopefully also sustainable and financial. Answering your question specifically, I think we have three pillars in general in technology when we're looking at the water industry. We have the sensors, obviously, we have the command, the remote control once you sense. But if you ask me, and what is the most needed technology, is actually anything that has to do with making decisions and analyzing with artificial intelligence. So when you analyze the big systems, so for example, a system that I know very well, the Sao Paulo system, you're talking about almost 40 million inhabitants, very segregated. And obviously the sensors is something that you need. But my question is, how do you manage all that data, and how can you make smart decisions automatically? And I think this is, if you ask me, where will we see the water industry doing a paradigm shift? Obviously, when it will become sustainable, and we will talk about that probably later, but mainly when we will have tools to make smart decisions that do not depend on us doing a huge Excels, connecting data from pressure management to weather to risk of assets and so forth. So for me, that is the key issue today.
Yeah, no, and I think it's very important. As much as we talk about capturing data, generating data, it's what you do with that, because otherwise it's dark data, right? And it doesn't really support the decision making. And I guess, Andre, just to bring you into the discussion here from an industrial point of view, do you see, obviously, working in the context of the Americas, that the focus on measurement, monitoring, decision making is probably relevant for managing AB InBev's water footprint in the region?
So absolutely. So that's certainly a lesson that we have learned and got better at over time in terms of managing and measuring water across the business. I think 10 years ago in many breweries, we were still debating, is the water being used in utilities? Is it being used in packaging? Is it the brewer who's at fault? And of course, everybody points their fingers at each other. And I think if you scale that up to a city level, I believe the absolute priority has to be in terms of technology for the measurement and accountability on water use at the city level. We clearly can see at a panel like this the potential of digital technology, of AI, etc. But just basic measurement and accountability of who is accountable for water across the system, and making that public in a sensible way that can be used by decision makers, but also those who have to hold elected and other officials to account, I think will go a long way to having cities who have 20, 30, or 40% of water that's unaccounted for. Of course, just because it's unaccounted for doesn't mean that it's wasted. But I really believe that by driving measurement, management, and accountability, the key technologies are there. We just have to adopt them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think it's turning that data into accountability, and that partly brings in the human aspect of it as well, beyond just the technology. So, Gigi, from your perspective, I know you've worked, with several utilities that have probably tackled some of these challenges. How does this look from your perspective? Specific to Americas, looking at these technologies, we've heard some interesting issues here about, just trying to get some measurement solutions in there, decision making. How does this fit into it from your perspective?
Yeah, so I agree. First of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here with everyone. Yeah, I agree with all the panelists so far. And on top of that, what I have found is when I work with utilities, they are collecting a lot of data. They do have data sources in a lot of locations that could be very useful for analytics and providing insights. But one of the biggest barriers that I see is not necessarily deploying technologies, because you will find a lot of utilities deploying like a vertical type of technology to solve leak detection. So they'll install specific sensors around certain areas of pipes to solve that one problem. So they are collecting data. But what's really powerful that we have not taken full advantage of in the water sector, I believe, is the integration of all these siloed data. And that becomes one of the biggest hurdles that most utilities have to deal with. So for example, most utilities will have a SCADA system for operation. They might have a GIS system that also shows where all their assets are. They might have a work order system to show exactly what assets are being worked on and provided maintenance. But what they find sometimes difficult is the integration of all those data sets to really do some amazing and insightful insights. And of course, you know, I'm a big proponent of digital twin. We can talk about that a little bit later, but I do believe one of the most dire need right now is this ability to integrate data sets coming from different platforms and different applications. And this is not just an easy automatic, put some middleware type of solution. It really requires data normalization, because a pump in a SCADA system might be labeled one way and labeled completely a different way in the GIS system. And so to be able to merge those data sets, you really have to have a manual intervention and do that mapping for the difference in ID. So I would say that is one of the key elements that's missing that will really open up the floodgates for analytics.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, Gigi, and it's actually a great segue to the next question. What are some of the drivers and barriers to adoption of these solutions? And obviously, integration is huge. Interoperability, if you've got some legacy system and you're trying to migrate to something else, if you're trying to upgrade. Thinking back to all of you from your answers before, we're thinking about measurement solutions, decision making, making sure water is accounted for better, integration. What do you see as really the key drivers and barriers here, specific to the Americas? I mean, would you say, is it really having to do with politics? Is it about just how the cost of water is or is not reflected in OpEx? How do you see that? Ivan, maybe you want to start off. What do you see maybe is the biggest holdup?
Yeah, so our focus is on water quality, and I think there's some very specific and unique challenges in and around water quality, in the sense that it's a very specialized kind of subfield, even within hydrology, and making information about water quality understandable and easy to communicate is, I don't think, is fundamentally a Latin American challenge. It's really a challenge globally to interpret and understand the sources of information that are there. What is really the impacts on a kind of in a holistic way from ecosystem to biodiversity loss to direct health impacts. So that's really kind of an acute challenge that we see working in water quality, in particular for surface systems. High sediment loads in reservoirs can be detrimental in terms of the carrying capacity of those reservoirs, but they can also be extremely advantageous in coastal resiliency, for example, where you need the sediments to flow to protect that estuarine ecosystem. So there's no one size fits all. It's really important to understand the context. And what's most important is to have data systems that are understandable and easy to communicate. And from our perspective, geoinformation systems like those that are produced by remote sensing data or other systems really enable that ease of communication across stakeholders, across organizations or divisions within an organization, et cetera. So that's really an area of focus for us.
Excellent. No, I mean, it also sounds like there's a lot of upfront diagnostic that need to be done before these solutions get implemented as well. Because as you said before, it's not one size fits all. which means that there needs to be a period where you're calibrating the solution, you're making sure the GIS is up to date. Okay. Shimon, how would you answer that question about, drivers and barriers to adoption? You mentioned before decision-making with AI. Does that mean that we're talking about reaching the right decision makers to begin with on the people side and making sure that they understand the technology? What do you see in terms of drivers or inhibitors for adoption?
Yeah, honestly, I feel that the main inhibitor today, and when you talk to many utilities around the world, you do notice that in the end of the day, they need to make a decision on whether they will invest in one thing or another. And one of the biggest barriers they find is having a real business case for the technology. So technology, not for the sake of it, rather for what will that bring to me. And in Kandu's case, for example, if we're talking about detection of pollutants in the sewage system, how will that impact my possibly damage to my treatment plant? How will that impact economically to my water utility? And obviously, I will need to balance that out. So I think one of the biggest inhibitors is that. How do you justify a business case that makes sense for the water utility on one hand? On the other hand, I think another one is policy. So policy and regulation from governments need to be put in place. Science and policymakers need to work together in that sense. And exactly as we have seen the telecom industry being regulated and being demanded for better technologies, 3G, 4G, 5G, with huge popularity, I think we need to see the same thing happening in contracts for concessions, whether big PPPs or full concessions, need to have that demand for, as I said, financially justifiable technology and innovation.
Yeah, no, I much appreciate that effort as well. I think that sometimes we can all say we wish that there were more regulations in place, there was more stringent enforcement of water quality standards or pipe replacements, et cetera. But at the end of the day, you have to deal with the world as it is now, how we would like it to be, and adjust to that. So, I mean, thinking about that, some of your comments before, Andre, about kind of water footprint and conserving water, what do you think are some of the drivers and barriers? You touched a bit before on some of the politics around water management, but what does this look like from your perspective, Andre?
Yeah, if you think the data around water is complicated, clearly the policy and the institutional frameworks are equally complicated, and it's not often easy for the water utilities to provide the type of data visibility based on the multiple demands placed upon them. So I think driving towards accountability is going to be critical for them, and make sure that we get to that visibility of the data. I think the issue to focus on is that Ivan touched on is in terms of quality, water quality. So much is just invisible within the system. So I think one of the key issues is that the decision makers often do not have to live with the consequences of quality decisions, because it's much more visible if you put upfront a new water infrastructure, etc. But those who are the impact of quality, water quality, etc., only comes down the track. So we need to find a way of bringing visibility and accountability to that if we want to overcome the problem. And I think the data tools, the technology is now available to do that.
Yeah, no, I think the communications aspect of it to drive that visibility is huge, especially when you're facing scarcity in some markets, when you have big contamination problems. Then it's kind of in their face, but there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes, managing underground assets that may be less evident to them. Gigi, from your perspective, drivers and barriers here, obviously digital transformation is a big topic. There's a lot of moving parts. You mentioned integration before. If you had to narrow down to some specific things, maybe thinking specifically about the Americas, what would you point to there?
I mean, again, I think part of digital transformation, I always look, if you're seeing digital transformation as a continuous journey, then almost at the end of that road, or not at the end, but as you mature in digital transformation, you should have all the ingredients and components to start to build a digital twin. And I always talk about digital twin technology as one of the most powerful technologies available to provide insights and decision support systems. You can imagine when I talk about digital twin, we say it's a digital representation of a system, both the dynamicity or the dynamics of that system, as well as the current status. You do that by using models married with context data. And the output of that is very powerful. And I usually talk about it with virtual sensors. So you can imagine if you want to know something about a remote system, you want to deploy as many sensors as possible, but that gets too expensive. But if you deploy a few sensors and marry that information with modeling information, which comes from the engineering world, comes from a knowledge-based concept, you marry those two together. Now you have a capability of providing infinite number of sensors. And once you have infinite number of sensors, because your model is currently calculating all of these virtual sensors, you now have better insights of what's really happening in your remote system, and you can manage it better. Right now, we in the water sector always are in reactive mode. Things go wrong, and then we quickly try to fix them. Imagine, I believe digital twin technology is the one type of technology that can put us, smack in the middle of a proactive mode. We should be more like the airline industry, where we do preventative maintenance way ahead of time. We never get to the point of failure. We should think the same way as the airline industry.
Super interesting, Gigi. And again, I think the modeling aspect that you're touching on really drives the point of, there needs to be an organizing principle around adopting some of this technology and being able to get to the point where you're not just looking at a handful of sensors. I think you called it infinite sensors.
Virtual.
That's really interesting. Virtual sensors.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so again, I want to remind the audience, we haven't gotten a ton of questions here. I can obviously field some of my own, but the audience, you're welcome to chime in here, and we'll try to get to some of those. We are a bit short on time, though. I am conscious of that. So the last question here, I'm going to ask you guys to keep your answers kind of brief, but what we're trying to do in this last question is move a bit from the abstract to some more concrete signposts for when we think innovation is happening. I think it's easy to say, 5, 10 from years now, they should be doing this, or we could be doing that. Do you guys have certain milestones, whether within your business or with some of your clients that you're looking at, that indicate to you that things are changing? So that could be, the city of Sao Paulo actually put a bunch of RTUs on their pump stations, or it could be, in Mexico City, they really decided they had to upgrade their GIS, which they hadn't done in 15 years. It would be very interesting if you guys have something quick that could give us a taste for what you see as something where you would say, wow, things are moving forward, because that's going to help us move into the next topic 2, which is talking about some of these specific case studies. So Ivan, you got maybe a specific example that you might point to say, hey, you know what, things are changing in terms of digital transformation in the Americas?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're working with a number of clients to look at portfolio-wide, infrastructure investments, conservation work, and conservation organizations that are doing work across the Americas. And what I'm really encouraged by is that the teams are using the technology tools that are out there to really make decisions about what's working and what's not. And to me, that's a great leading indicator of what's to come, because these organizations that are investing in infrastructure and conservation should be at the forefront of engaging stakeholders in specific problem areas that exist. So to me, that's super encouraging. What I always say is my prior experience in the semiconductor industry is that about 45% of CapEx and OpEx to produce those devices is spent on measurement technologies. That's clearly not the case in water, either infrastructure or conservation. That's not necessarily where we need to end up, but certainly in looking at investments in monitoring solutions is a great proxy to seeing how well somebody's committed to and then change in either operations, the way that they operate, manage, or dispose of water issues.
Right, right. Okay. Shimon, do you have anything that's in your mind as sort of a milestone, maybe in the next 3 to 5 years for digital adoption?
Sure. I think I might be a little bit reiterated here, but definitely regulation. And if you ask me specifically, what is the one thing that will be the indicator that things are changing? I think for me is when you'll see innovation coming in the contractual formulas. So when you will see a tender coming out that is not price based and is not turning the actual purchase into a commodity, then you will open the space for innovation. Then you will allow companies to really present new technologies. And obviously for the purchaser, so many times you see Latin American water utilities needing to comply with the law, obviously, and issue a tender that doesn't give them any space for innovation. So for me, that will be a good indicator if we see that in the next 5 years changing.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Seeing that kind of thinking embedded in the procurement process. Andre, what about from your perspective? Something that is on your mind in terms of a key shift, a specific event we might see in the next 3 to 5 years?
So I think you could test whether we made progress if you could find in the next 3 to 5 years publicly in a newspaper or a website, what is the percent of water that's unaccounted for in a particular location? I think that would be a good progress, or clear, regular publication from a trusted source on what is the water quality issues in a particular area. I think that type of availability of data would be critical. But I just want to emphasize, none of this is that this is only the public sector's responsibility. I think there's a huge responsibility for all sectors to play a role in this. Water is complex, so I think the private sector has a huge role to play in watershed investments. We're also working with utilities and others in terms of what data can be integrated, how we can assist. So I think this has to be a societal effort, and data has to enable it.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Andre. And Gigi, from your perspective, key
Yeah.
milestone maybe next 3 to 5 years?
Yes, so I've already started to see a shift in this direction, but I think it's cloud computing. And the reason why I say that is because as we do more data analytics, we're going to need more expansive use of compute resources. And of course, as we go towards digital twin and we run simulation model in real time, we're going to need more expansive use of compute resources. So I feel like the integration of cloud computing with water utility is a very clear indication that we are on our journey to digital transformation. And we've already started. I've seen a big change over just the last 5 years, but there's still much more to go.
Great, thanks, Gigi. All right, guys. Well, look, I think this has been a pretty fascinating discussion. We are a few minutes behind on time, so I think with some of the questions from the audience, we're gonna have to follow up in a separate section. Just to bring the semblance of closure to this, because I'm sure we could be talking for another several hours here. There's a lot to talk about. I think what we've heard is that data is obviously key. You need to capture that data. And, I think Yvonne made some good points around those measurement solutions, but then it's what you do with that data that matters a lot. And so the decision making with AI, being able to model with that data as well and make better decisions in terms of asset management are very important. But all of that needs to happen within a context where the business case behind it is very clear. So to Shimon's point about, a lot of this stuff isn't going to get adopted unless it's clear how you're going to lower operating costs or extend the lifetime of assets. I think we also heard here that, water needs to become more visible, and the communication around why these issues need to be tackled needs to form part of the policy making and be more visible to the public. So I want to thank you guys all again for your participation in this first topic. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We have some very interesting questions from the audience, which we're going to follow up with in the follow-up to this session. And with that, I would like to thank you guys again and hope you can stick around for topic 2 here, where we're going to talk about some more specific case studies in terms of implementing technology.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Keith.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And with this, and to do the closing remarks, I would like to point out how innovation is changing the world, right? It is raising new opportunities for all sectors, for all industries. It's highlighting how efficiency and agility is for our processes. And most importantly, is helping us securing a more favorable environmental impact. In this session, we have talked with international leaders who are pushing boundaries, who are nowadays envisioning and designing the interaction and relationship with water that we need to build an equal, safe, and resilient future for our communities. Among everything that is being said on how we are now aware that technology is an evolutive and iterative process, and how we can use it to drive measurement and accountability, and to build strong business cases, and to design data systems in an holistic and understandable way, and all this so important with this important conversation that you have shared with us, and for that we are really thankful. We would like just to add that from our experience with the use of technology for watershed health surveillance in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, through remote sensors and mathematical modeling, at Defensa Foundation, we totally relate to what you kindly shared. It is key to collaborate with the local governments to identify needs, to effectively implement the tools generated by the use of technology, and to define priorities and initiatives that guarantee the water security of the city. We all believe in the great potential of creative solutions to improve increasingly more people's context. And we know we cannot do it alone, right? Let this session be a reminder that collective action allows each sector to contribute whatever is needed to make this solution accessible and scalable, and that technology will be our greatest partner to do so too. Thanks to all, and have a great day.
Okay, Lorena, we're going to move on to the second topic now, where we've got some follow-up speakers who are going to address the practical examples of implementing these technologies. So thanks for that, Lorena. I thought that was, I think we all need to recognize the progress that's been made here. And this next session, it's called Disrupting Water, Digital Technology Adoption and Implementation. And so for our second group of speakers, they're going to illustrate how some of these technologies, not specifically everything we were talking about before about digital twins, but some related technologies that fit part of the overall solutions portfolio that can be implemented in the Americas. We've got very esteemed speakers here that are going to present some brief case studies of what they've been doing in the region, which I think would be very interesting. So just to quickly introduce them, Pratik Joshi, he's the CEO of PlutoShift. PlutoShift applies machine learning to develop operational data platforms that support decision-making. We're going to be followed by Allison Wedgwood. Allison is the CEO at eWater Services, and they're using digital water technologies to provide 24/7 affordable and sustainable water for over 150,000 low-income consumers in rural and peri-urban Tanzania, Ghana, and Gambia. And I'm sure it's an interesting solution for the Americas as well. Then we've got Cody Friesen with us. He's the founder and CEO of Source Global, which provides hydro panels, which is a sustainable drinking water solution that is completely autonomous using solar energy. And then lastly, we've got Sarah Young from Northwestern University. And Professor Young, her current research is focused on new ways to measure water insecurity. And she's also led the development of the first cross-culturally valid tool to measure household water access and use. So thanks again, guys, for joining us, for the time you put into your presentations. I want to hand it over now to Pratik at PlutoShift. Pratik, you got 5 minutes. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Keith. First of all, really excited to be here. And also, Joanna, if you can bring up the slide. So basically, the the topic of interest here, so Latin America, the water sector, what kind of, as a business, we see a lot of companies managing their water, and also our primary way to kind of help them understand what they can do with it. So as we look at a specific case study, right? So significant droughts in the region kind of threaten water availability. And also kind of, if you look a little bit deeper into the data, leaks kind of cause about 40% of losses, which means that, first of all, the water is scarce in the region. On top of that, when the water goes from one place to another, the leaks kind of add to that problem. And also, if you look at the companies, they don't have the ability to optimize these processes remotely, meaning, as of today, we got to go to the site and make sure the processes are running. And then on top of that, you kind of have tools where you would use that to make sure that things are working properly. So why is it a problem, right? If you look at one of the main key items here, water scarcity, it makes it difficult to meet the demand, and but also kind of lack of system optimization, meaning the fact that you have to go on site across all the sites to make improvements. It before you know it, a lot of water gets used up unnecessarily, and also lack of visibility causes a lot of issues. So earlier, Andre Fourier, he made an excellent point about, one of the key items here is there are so many different stakeholders across, within the supply chain, and how do we drive accountability? Meaning, how do we know who's using what? And also, how do we make sure we're all on the same page on where the water is going, how much of it is being used, how much of it is being wasted, so that once you know what's happening, once you measure it, then you can get to the next problem of how do you improve the processes. So once something happens within this vast physical infrastructure, knowing that it's happening and spotting where it's happening, and then on top of that, identifying the root cause, that's a long drawn out process. And that, at the heart of it, that is what we are solving. What we solve for customers, we have been doing it in the US and Latin America, Asia, is at the heart of it, we've built a platform that offers remote management approaches by providing always on monitoring. Now, a big part of this is instrumenting the physical infrastructure, meaning do we, if we want to optimize a water process, do we have data related to like pressure, temperature, flow rates? Are we measuring it across the entire path, so that now we can look at it and see what's happening? So at the heart of it, ODP, Operational Data Platform, it basically represents a category of tools that you would use to analyze and process physical infrastructure data. So it taps into machine learning to understand how data is coming in through many sources. Is there an anomaly that's happening? Is there a leak that's happening? Is there a resource that's being consumed a lot more than it should? And then sending the right alert to the right time. So machine learning can provide it's a phenomenal tool that can analyze a large quantity of data and then surface the right. It detects the right things. It predicts what's going to happen next, and also at the heart of it, it helps increase the speed and quality of decision making. And also, if you look at why, one of the key issues is the data that gets originated, it's fragmented, meaning unifying it is a big part of it. And that's what a good monitoring platform would do for you. And in this case, some of the common use cases we have seen are, it relates to understanding water quality, water recovery, and also optimizing decisions related to water use. So we work with large food companies, beverage companies, manufacturing companies to install this platform or deploy this platform so that users can access it remotely. So yes, I hope that gives a good idea, and excited to be here. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Pratik. Just one question. I mean, you mentioned remotely and data management. Would you say that with the pandemic, that has accelerated interest in this? Because the idea is that we're all getting used to working more virtually, we're manipulating more data. Has that, again, trying to keep the answer brief here, do you see more rapid take up in the Americas based on what's been happening lately?
100%. We have seen, if anything, it has really accelerated the need to do this. It's that companies, even before, they knew that they have to keep an eye on infrastructure, but the remote part of it got amplified so much that now there is a spectacular amount of interest in making sure, can we do this remotely? Do we have the connectivity, the tools to make things happen remotely? And so 100% agree. It's been, I think it's been an accelerant for sure.
Nice. Okay, great. Thank you, Pratik, for that. I think we're seeing that there's a lot to be done with that data that isn't necessarily being done. But the remote monitoring aspect of it as well, I think is very interesting. Allison, as I understand, eWater services, the solutions that eWater is providing has that sort of remote management capability as well, which makes sure that these units are functioning 24/7. So very excited to hear from you on the solution and how it might apply to the Americas.
Thank you. Yeah. I really do believe that digital technology can be a solution. But there is I'm going to just quickly, I've got 4 or 5 minutes, I'm going to talk about, we've learned the hard way that no amount of smart digital technology can do it alone. So 5 years ago, we set out to design and build smart prepayment taps that could operate at extremely low cost in remote rural villages in Tanzania, Gambia, and Ghana. And the technologies worked. Consumers buy credit from shopkeepers using cash and NFC onto a tag like this. I think you can still see me. Just buy an NFC transaction onto the shopkeeper's phone, or they can use their mobile money accounts and pick up the credit from their favorite smart tap. It's all stored in their personal cloud wallet. And when they touch the tap, water comes out, credit is deducted. We've even got a system where diaspora and distant relatives can send water credit to a family tag. And we've even got a bunch of people from New York funding schools directly, and they're getting live monthly updates on every transaction in those schools. And we've got 450 smart taps have tracked 453 million litres of water over the last 2 years. And some of the poorest communities in sub-Saharan Africa have spent over $300,000 buying water because they trust us. But we installed IoT remote sensors connected to our live dashboard, and they report on flow rates, water tanks, and we created this idea of an eWater Care dashboard, and we sold the taps and the dashboard to various third parties because our business plan was based upon the fact that we would sell smart taps and eWater Care to NGOs, to water utilities and governments and water ministries. We thought by solving the finance bit and the sort of dashboard alerts, that would be enough to solve the sort of the water crisis in Africa. But the problem was often our taps would be working, but there'd still be no water coming out of them. So we'd be getting data when the comms were working, showing there's no water coming out. We knew our text alerts were going out to technicians, but still, even though they had responsibility for fixing stuff, there wasn't clear management. And so things didn't get fixed. And so it was our name on the smart taps when people were getting frustrated with. But meanwhile, in one country, the Gambia, we were running the programs ourselves. The government had gone really light touch regulatory. They just said, yeah, you go and fix these systems. So we raised private finance to rehabilitate broken solar systems with boreholes and about 20 taps in each village. And this worked because we were controlling not just our smart meters and the IoT technology and the cloud payment system. We were also controlling. So if you look at the slide, I don't know if the slide is up. Yeah, you can see the slide. So we were basically controlling what we call eWater Services Smart Village. So the technicians were also eWater employees, local people, so that we could control everything ourselves. And this is what works. So we knew that when we had a sensor on the tank, and we knew in one village that the tank was going down at night, and we could work out, through multiple regression that it was probably not a natural leak and someone was stealing it. And so in Gambia, we found that things were really working, even though people were only paying $6 a year. And what also the really big thing that we found with our complete water village is that we were not only able to pay for the operation and maintenance and run this sustainably, but also we were able to pay back the debt financing for the original capital investment, which is a really big breakthrough, and that's happened in the last year. So one thing that we think is really, really important is that for the digital technology in itself is really useful, but there has to be this really important that governments and consumers trust private operators, and the digital technology has a really important role because it creates a transparency, because we have 44,000 transactions per day recorded on the private blockchain, right at the microtransaction level. You know, we're using cryptography. We track every 0.1 cent of revenue, which is verifiable and accountable, and that can't be falsified. So suddenly we have a system where the government trusts us, the community trusts us, but only when we are 100% design, build and operating it with the government hands off. And we've learned that the hard way.
Yeah,
Am I still good for time? Have we got another minute?
You're bang on. I think that's great. I think it's interesting here. I'm hearing that obviously, you know, there's a lot of stakeholder management there. I think your point about you do kind of have to have an end-to-end solution. It's very holistic, this idea of the village. It can't just be bits and pieces, because otherwise you're not able to do probably the same amount of quality control.
Yeah.
And I think what you're talking about as well is a great segue into probably some of the challenges, but also opportunities that that Cody has seen at Source Global. So Cody, we'd like to hand it off to you next to hear your thoughts on tackling some of these challenges and the experience of Source.
Sure. Thanks, Keith, and thanks for having me here. Excited to see all of you. Maybe to start with, so I come out of 2 decades in the renewable energy sector, and what we've seen, over the last dozen years or so, is about a factor of 15 cost reduction, and obviously performance gains, such that solar is now cheaper than the extractive sort of fossil fuel industry, which is sort of a remarkable thing, right? When you said that to people a decade ago, that was coming. It's sort of a shocking thought that free coal somehow would be more expensive than solar PV, and obviously that's a huge unlock for the world. And so it was sort of the simple thought and simple question of, could we move the needle on the global drinking water challenge by applying the principles of renewables, the same sort of approaches we've taken to achieve those types of cost performance levels. And so that question that led to the formation of Source Global. And so now, sort of fast forward from the founding of the company about half a dozen years ago, based on research that occurred in my my lab at Arizona State University, where I'm a professor of material science, that now Source hydro panels, our product, now installed in 52 countries around the world, across thousands of sites, at schools, homes, hotels, hospitals, and so on, refugee camps, and sort of you think about the impact that is happening today with a single SKU, without the sort of mass customization challenges associated with basically every water project that has ever occurred in the past. And if you fast forward to the next, or click to the next slide, you get a sense of what a Source hydro panel looks like. It looks a little bit like a thick solar PV panel, with maybe a little bit more going on than what happens in a solar PV panel. And so Source is really a fully distributed, off-grid, ultra low OpEx solution that provides pure water independent of the air that it comes out of, across a wide range of environmental zones, in a way that's sort of fully digitized, in the sense that every single hydro panel is connected to a Cassandra database that's riding on Amazon Web Services, that allows us to see that, in fact, not only are we producing the amount of water that we've committed to produce at a particular site, but also that it's of a particular quality, given our sensor technology. So what that really enables is sort of the first global fully digitized drinking water source, in a way that really does sort of bring those principles of renewables to water in a way that, we're still ourselves figuring out what the implications of that are. One example, if you click to the next slide, is with the Wayu tribe in the far northern tip of Colombia, in a place called Bahia Handita. The women, primarily the women and girls of this community, were walking about 6 hours a day to a brackish well to secure their water. And so we installed 2 arrays, very much like the one you see in the top image there, that now provides the drinking water for about 300, 350 people. And so it really, shifted them from walking for their drinking water. Of course, that water was non-potable in the traditional sense of the term, and now they have much more time to self-actualize. So with that, happy to take any questions, Keith. Hopefully, I'm on time.
Thanks, Cody. No, that's super interesting to see. Obviously, a direct application there of trying to come up with something that's practical, that is hitting that need for no access at all to having a relatively steady flow, not even having access to bottled water. So, I think both from eWater and Source that has addressed some of these challenges, but also the digital piece about being able to monitor those installations is really important. Our last speaker, and you're gonna have to keep it brief, apologize, Sarah Young. Sarah, why don't you take it away talking about this household consumption project that you've been working on, and then after that we'll wrap it up.
Sure thing. Thanks. If you could share my slide. And while you pull that up, I'll congratulate my fellow panelists on doing awesome work. So a lot of this session has been a discussion of data and how we use that data. But I want to shift the conversation back a tiny bit to ask or remind us, what data are we starting from? And I would argue, this is my whole shtick, is we need to change the way that we measure water security. We need to think about the human experience with water. We're really good at measuring availability, and we're really good at measuring infrastructure, but without knowing humans' experiences, we don't have the full picture. And this is how food insecurity is measured. It's people's experiences, and we've learned in the food sector, we should do the same for water. So a couple of years ago, we developed this scale. I'll skip the blood and the sweat and the tears and the statistics that went into it. You can just take a picture of that QR code or go to hwise.org. And you can see that it's this really simple 12 items that generate high resolution data that's easy to collect. It's easy to analyze, like my 5th grader can do it. And it's comparable. So like Cody could use this to look at the water insecurity in that group before he installed those panels and after. Or there are any number of examples of how you can use this to evaluate where you need to make an investment, what the return on that investment is. And so people are starting to see the use of this. These are some of the organizations. I want to call out that Gallup and UNESCO and Northwestern have partnered to get nationally representative data in 31 countries, and they're the ones in purple at the back. So we have the first picture, like estimates of water insecurity for Brazil and for China and for India and a lot of other countries. And with that, we want these data to become a public good that policymakers can use to make good choices, that companies can use to make good choices, and that researchers can use to evaluate the work that they think they are doing.
Sarah, thank you so much. I'm really sorry to have to cut all of this short. I want to thank everybody for your participation. I think we've learned a lot here about some of the challenges that we're facing, but also some of the solutions. We've got some questions from the audience. I think we'll have to follow up those later. I understand we're going to get cut off in about 30 seconds. So with that, I'm just going to briefly pass it back to Lorena, if she's still on the call here, who's going to pull all this together in the remaining 20 odd seconds we have. Lorena, are you still there? Okay, well then I'll handle this myself. Guys, I think that what we've heard from is that there is a bit of a gap here between, maybe what the market is giving us in terms of policy, but the opportunity is there, the solutions are there. And I think we are very thankful for having you on the line here. So thanks again, everybody, for your contributions. And we'll circulate later the questions, because there's some interesting questions for all you guys to think about and interact with the audience. So thanks again, and have a great afternoon or evening wherever you are.
Thank you, Keith. That was
Thank you very
awesome.
much, Keith. Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Take care, guys.
Thank you,
Be
Keith.
well.
Very nice.
Thanks, bye.